2014, we have worked with 25 ecosystems at the ground level so far. So in our work, we try to focus on activities where what type of challenges are ecosystem specific and what type of challenge and solutions and tools can be more covering several different ecosystems geographically or in the perspective of various business verticals. So why do we do this? We see entrepreneurship-led innovation as the most positive and powerful driver to grow economies and develop and push societies forward. And specifically in startups, this focus and drive and energy is really encapsulated in format that is very agile and effective in delivering those innovations and finding solutions to problems at various scale. Regardless of many startups failing, still several of those concepts live also and are then replicated by others and spreading this way as well. So even the failures are contributing significantly for the society at large. So because of these reasons, we have had a challenge to really try to focus on how to scale the entrepreneurship and innovation. So how to find scalable ways to make as big impact for innovation, entrepreneurship and startups as possible. And these are the background to really understand why do we operate in the ways we operate and why do we have so specific focus on one hand on our activities, specifically scalability and some of the core concepts that we'll go through, but also why do we have so broad offering at the same time that we don't directly ourselves facilitate to end users, so to speak, the startups and so forth. So hopefully we'll be able to cover this with enough detail. So the startup ecosystems are really the key engine for enabling entrepreneurship, and that's why we focus on helping the startup ecosystem development. They really create majority of the jobs, they attract talent, they give opportunities for younger people and also those who are in between their kind of next career moves and so forth. And then the core action, then how to really make ecosystems effective. There's many things that can be developed, but the single most effective thing is to improve the connectivity and matching of activities and all of those different things that go into how to make the network connectivity very effective. That's the main key contributor for growth. So these are the reasons why we have so specific focus on our own core activities. So our mission is purely to help scale entrepreneurship and innovation by empowering ecosystem development with common open framework, global best practices, and digital transformation for systematic and more data-driven development. The market from our perspective is that in the world there's more than 1,000 cities that have more than 500,000 population. So there's many ecosystems to really work with. So therefore we are not stuck with any single one. We are working with any ecosystem who are serious, committed and motivated to try and develop their ecosystem forward. There's another 4,000 and more ecosystems or cities having a population between 100,000 and 500,000. And in this case, the size, the impact of size is merely a factor of what types of activities ecosystems are having and what should be their strength or what may be their challenges. And depending on the size, there can be, sub-ecosystems within the ecosystem in one city already or the neighboring cities. But the main problem that we focus on is that every one of these ecosystems are struggling with this fragmented ecosystem information and connectivity problems. And we feel that this is a problem that if we are able to contribute this on a global scale to improve the network efficiency within the ecosystems themselves and even more broadly between the ecosystems, that can be the biggest single contributing factor that we can do for innovation entrepreneurship. So our grand vision, and to last time, this is not something that can easily be achieved, but this is what really drives our passion and drives our focus, is to help digitalize, connect, and enable real-time data flow within and between startup ecosystems globally. And there's many steps to get to this vision, and all of these activities that we do are aligned to help contribute for this main vision, while they are also independently effective as such. So the strategy part, how we do this, is also that we have a very neutral role to facilitate, develop and improve and license open standard frameworks in a scalable way, including startup education, innovation, entrepreneurship education, shared knowledge, best practices, and most importantly then finally also the digital solutions to help enable the data flow within and between ecosystem with the help of local ecosystem developers and operators. So our offering, or the key activities that we focus on, is one is helping to create more open shared global standard for innovation entrepreneurship education. A second part is to provide consulting and knowledge share to partner with the ecosystem developments on the ground to bring our global perspective and global best practices by those who are sharing their own practices and by those that we are developing to help get resources and tools elsewhere for more efficient resource utilization between ecosystems instead of everyone having to create everything by themselves over and over again. And finally, for digitalizing the core activities and enabling the data to flow. So quickly covering the education component, we have the common framework. We use this free open standard. So it basically means that it's published under Creative Commons. Anyone can use it as they like. Anyone can edit, make versions out of it. Anyone can contribute and give us suggestions. And we occasionally update the framework when we get great ideas or great inputs and publish a new version also from our side. And the core of this is the startup development phases and communication about what startup is and so forth. So the big confusion in the startup world is that it's still very relatively new term when we specifically in global context, and there's a lot of people who are still assessing to kind of grasp with that. It has also evolved a lot since it has been spreading, initially starting from the US venture capital industry perhaps 30, 40 years ago, and specifically coming from there. But when it has started to spread the world, it has get much more, I would say, global standard meaning, but it's still reshaping. And that's why there's a lot of misconceptions even on the terminology level. And that's one of the key parts that we focus as well. So here's a quick snapshot how we kind of separate these commonly seen terms between what is a startup, what is a scale-up, and what is a small business. And this just gives a quick snapshot framework that on one hand there is a growth ambition, and on the bottom side there's scalability or low growth ambition or lack of scalability. And then on the left side we have unvalidated business model, and on the right side we have market validated business model. So a startup is pushing testing a new business model, an innovation, and trying to pass it to be market validated and then become a scale up and starting to scale. At the same time, scale-up can also come from a small business or from an SME. Specifically, a typical situation is ownership change in a family company when there's more ambition by younger people to make some change, and they can start to also scale that company. Or perhaps converting a coffee shop into a franchise model, and that can also become a scale-up through that way. So this is how we help to kind of bring conceptual understanding and clear kind of simple tools to communicate and get quickly on the same page of things that we are talking about. This is the core open framework of all of our activities, where we have, in addition to the terminology, we have combined different key terminology that exists in the startup world, and we have created more understandable format to see startups' journey through these different phases, as well as the support functions, kind of key focus areas on formation, validation, and growth, and then added the key terminology that you commonly come across in the startup world, but put it in such order that their kind of relationship and their relevance at what the specific phase they belong to is more easily to consume. With this framework, it can then be used to basically not only see and identify and ask, or for entrepreneurs themselves to point at what development phase they are, but it also creates a whole language for everything else as well. For example, a business angel can clearly define that I'm only interested in investing between 1 and 2. If you are on 0 or -1, you're not relevant for my ability to support you yet. Or if you're already in 3, you're more relevant to VC funds. We are not extending our capital to that far. Or being that for support services, let's say the most common high volume activity in any ecosystem is startup events, to be able to label all of the events and support functions based on to what development phase they specifically cater for. For example, to get a company to support to get them from -1 to 1, or to get a company like an accelerator service from 0 to 2. So this is just the notion of this tool. One more item in here is that is important to understand from startups is that a lot of the support functions focus on the top level part, which is more from idea to product to business, and there's a big need and lack of typically support services on how to come from talent to co-founding team and how to build an organization to 10 to 50 to 100, maybe 1,000 people, which is the main reason why there's so much support going for startups, because we want them to be significant on their impact on creating jobs and economic growth. They can't do that with 5 people team. They also need to know how to scale their organization, and this organization development actually needs much more support than is typically available in an ecosystem. So a big part of helping to avoid failures when developing startups is about finding the balance between different areas that need to be developed in the startup. So this is also one kind of image to help assess how well balanced the startup is at any given state of their development. And this is again just a simplified tool to try to communicate as much value in as simple package as possible. The curriculum itself that we have released under open source way, so the same way under Creative Commons, that the actual framework is that the whole curriculum, all of the materials is available for free for anyone to use in their own education or training or ecosystem workshops. They can improve, edit, remove material, or make contributions for the common material. And this way we will also keep improving that. All of the contributors that come in will add to the curriculum and give credit back to those who added to the material. The Growth Academy is specifically targeted for innovation entrepreneurship, basically to help develop startups. It includes these 5 modules, and actually we are just now going through these modules. We have gone module 1, module 1B in a webinar format, and we are going to do the module 2, 3, and 4 also in a webinar format. And the webinars themselves are paid at the moment. We are considering releasing them later on, or potentially free, or at least through different means once we get them recorded. But for now, we are covering some of the production costs with those. So the model is combination. How to use this material is combination of traditional offline training and then the e-learning component. So we'll create the training materials. We'll work together with others, whoever want to contribute for the training materials. We'll share it under Creative Commons. But then there needs to be in-person coaching, advisory, training, where we then also create this certification model that anyone who wants to be also endorsed about their ability to deliver good quality training out of this material, they can get themselves certified if they want. There's no obligation. It's not dependent whether you can use material or not. Commercially even, that's okay. So the certification model is to help scale the availability and to be able to offer opportunities in offline where people can go more into details, whereas the e-learning component can make it available 24/7 in any global location in the world for self-learning, and it creates an opportunity to also start the in-person conversations more direct into specific topic if both parties have consumed the e-learning component. In addition, it's possible then, of course, when you go to a coach or you have a meeting with, or you take a part in a workshop, that then you can also go and consume more of that material just to remind yourself of some of the topics that were covered on live, but you only maybe have slides available. So this is how we are delivering this one. Consulting is then specific, where we take part in those consortiums or those individual organizations or teams who are working to develop the ecosystem locally. Whether that's a bottom-up activity or whether that's top-down activity or something in between, we are there to help support, as long as it's looking at the whole ecosystem level or about specific enabling some support functions where there's more interest to also see what other support functions are available through other ecosystems, and more of this collaborative development of those services. In ecosystem development, the key really is to help bring structure, help bring efficiency into how the ecosystem is developed, and get it more organized, get it more systematic, and then develop this systematically over time to improve it. The startups really are dependent on 2 ecosystems that are connected with startup ecosystem. On one hand, there's innovation ecosystem, where innovations also live without any ownership or any company. It can start as a research, and it can go even through a public sector. It can be independent researcher developing it forward, not the intention to do business out of that. It can be, in a kind of coming from a workshop, an idea that nobody develops forward. It can be IP that is licensed out of a bigger company, and things like that. On the other side, on entrepreneurship ecosystem, that of course includes all types of entrepreneurship, not just innovative one, not the team-formated startups, but also freelancers, lawyers, accountants, all types of entrepreneurs, taxi drivers, restaurant owners, and so forth. So the startup ecosystem basically lives and utilizes the best ingredients of these two worlds, both from IP side, so ideas, intellectual properties, and also from the most driven entrepreneurial people that then form teams, and then they go through these development phases. Within this ecosystem, there are certain type of things, and through that journey on these two sides, on idea to business side, from talent to organization side, that every single startup has to go through. They have to create something, and then they have to validate it, that it works, or that the commitment is there, and so forth. And here's how then the support services connect to this. If we look at the ecosystems overall, typically the beginning part is more public services, publicly funded services heavy, and when we go more on the more mature side, then it starts to move more on the private side, capital, private side partnership, private side channels, and there's a linear, gradual kind of change in between. In the beginning, the knowledge is more important. Later on, it's money and connections to help scale. In between, there's learning by everyone, and the validation hits there on the beginning, and that's really the point also, where things either start to work or they don't work, and then there's options to stop, restart, pivot, or whatnot. But if they pass validation phase, then they really become something interesting for everyone. The ecosystem itself involves these kind of different segments of actors. So in the center we have the business creators. So that's kind of a generic term we use to include, of course, the founding team members, but also those who take like board seats and are more long-term with the journey. So including investors, when they go into a journey, they are there for several years. So those all are more connected to the journey itself. And then the second level is the support providers that more look at the specific development phase, focus on that, spend a shorter time with individual venture, contributing for that, but do that in higher volumes. So that's the support providers function. And then there's this one bigger and missing and unclear role that is starting to formalize. Some have very clear activities here. Many have some type of activities, but not enough sustainable resources available, which goes into this how to orchestrate and how to develop the whole ecosystem. In some places, it's driven by private side. In some places, it's driven by governments. And from our perspective, it's not so much about who's driving it. It's much about how they're doing it and who are they inviting to take part in that. And ultimately, in all of this is also then, how does this look like in the digital world? How does the data live inside these activities? And these are the two focus areas that we specifically focus, that we think will have the biggest impact that we can focus on from our role to help get working. So if we look at ecosystem as a funnel, this is how things develop. It's not a closed pipe, of course. Companies come and go. They can spend shorter period, longer period at any development phase, depending on what they're building and what are the resources and learnings. Also, companies can come from another country after validation, before validation, or they can also lead to another ecosystem. So they are very fluid in that sense. Here's a little bit of perspective in a kind of a snapshot. This is generalized snapshot of various different types of ecosystems, and also from a different maturity level ecosystems. So this is just an indicative statistical perspective to give some idea of the types of volumes that how the volume passes through the funnel and what kind of activities then should be kind of available. And you can multiply that number with any kind of taking it from a population perspective and multiply that to get to kind of the types of numbers to look into, not to benchmark so much, but as a guideline, for example, of how much of certain type of support functions are needed for different types of development phases, and therefore also guiding the type of approach that should be applied to be able to cover certain levels of these numbers. It's also showing kind of how the evolution between initially ideas, they don't have to be dependent whether it becomes a startup or growth company or not. That happens more through the learning or then by design, depending on the founders. The way to measure the ecosystem, that is a key part of the data as well, but also from any financier's perspective is how do you measure the activities, how do you measure the ecosystem, and how can the activities be calculated, whether the return of investment, whatever money that is, and the public money, which is all of our collective taxpayers' money, should be most carefully considered when spending that money into development of what type of results, not only what results happen through the project, but what are the more permanent results that they were able to establish. So on the consulting side, this was just a quick snapshot of the types of things that we will have. And for example, the growth advisory module 1B that we did yesterday, and the recording is available. That is like 3 hours of just from the ecosystem development part alone. And that is still a very short snapshot of the available material and content we have. In an offline workshop, what we usually do when we start working with the new ecosystem is that we work with the contact person, the key contact person of the ecosystem who wants to make this happen. And we do this two-day workshop where on the first day we focus on collecting talking about the information that is collected beforehand about the key elements of the local ecosystem, as well as then covering the knowledge part. And then we have a night in between or 2 days in between, and then we come back for a second day when we then focus on defining what is the vision and the milestones for the ecosystem development, for the ecosystem in question, from the eyes of SWOT approach initially, and then drawing that big picture of how that ecosystem should look like in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years. It's more important to know what the picture should look like to be able to get there than the pace and real activities in each of the year how to get there. And knowing how the picture should look like will help them to make decisions also along the way. So just like startups have their development phases, startup ecosystems also have certain maturity levels that we can kind of, through our experience, we have seen them going through. And with the initial kind of assessment, we can pretty quickly see about what phase the ecosystem maturity is. And therefore, we can also recommend tools that are most suited for that type of maturity level. Because there are always certain types of things that should be created first, more like foundational things, before you start building a house on top of that. Because certain things lead to certain other things, and these are important perspective. So that you can kind of on your own also try to assess your own ecosystems. We have this kind of very quick summary to help do that as well.